Hello everyone. So earlier we created a parametric bar scale, but now they're asking for a parametric north arrow. So to understand what we need to do for a parametric north arrow, I think the first thing we need to look at is what should it look like. If you go to the National CAD standards, they pretty well spell it out that it's a circle with plan north on it and a vertical bar showing which direction the sheet should be oriented and then which direction north is oriented to that. So uh, thinking about it, plan north can be oriented one of two ways, either in a landscape mode, so a sheet is laid out in landscape, or if you're looking at it from the title block side, it could also be in portrait mode. So this north arrow probably needs to have two orientations, one that's straight up and the other one that's oriented so that it's 90 degrees off of that. Then the other thing is there needs to be a a north arrow, and the direction that north is usually determined someplace on one of the early civil sheets of what really north is, because there's magnetic north and true north, but they don't even mention the grid north that is typically used on drawings. So like what I'm used to is we're using Washington South, we need to know which way that is according to that grid system. So let's look at this and see what we can do to create a parametric cell. The first thing we should do is create a new model. So I'm going to create a new design model and I'm going to call this something simple like North Arrow. And it's going to be a cell, annotation cell, with it's going to be a parametric annotation cell. And we'll say OK. All right, let's verify our settings on this model. So we're working in feet and inches, and we set our maximum accuracy. That's probably going to be pretty good. So then, is there something we should start with? If we come over to the cell libraries and attach the general requirement cell library, there is a north arrow in here. I think it's called plan north or something like that. Someplace in here. Here we go. Those are true north arrows. Let's go back up. It's got to be in here someplace. I know it's in there somewhere. Elevations. Let's come in here and take a quick look and see if there's something we can start with. I know it's got to be. Oh, there we go. Plan north. There we go. So if I insert this cell and hit F11 and then PP and then 0, 0, 0, that puts me pretty much where that cell should start. And this pretty much has all of the information that we want to put on a plan north, but we want to make this thing parametric. So instead of running this thing, we're going to drop it. And then we're going to start making this stuff more parametric. So the first thing I want to do is go over here to my constraints, and I'm going to make this circle fixed because that's going to be my basis for my north arrow. Then the next thing I want to do is fix the radius of this thing. So I'm going to come in here and do by element, and this should be a 5/8 circle. So we're going to make this thing 3, 1, 2, 5 and make sure that's exact. Okay, and then we're going to look at the degrees of freedom of that circle. 0. Good. So that thing is fixed and locked. So the next thing we're going to want to do is set the these lines here so that they are coincident. So I'm going to set that line coincident to that end of the circle, and that other end of the line coincident to that side of the circle. And then let's look at the degrees of freedom on that. There's 2, which means that can be rotated, or it can be, well, it could be lengthened, I guess. So what I really want to do here is fix the length of this line. So I'm going to set that by element. And that should be twice whatever that distance is. So if we fix the length of that, the degree of freedom now is probably 1, which means I can rotate it. So I want to lock that thing too. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to make it fixed, but I'm just going to pick the line. And what that does is it fixes the angle of that so that it doesn't rotate. So now the degrees of freedom of that is 0. Okay, so that fixes that. I'm going to move this thick line out of the way right now because it's kind of in the way of what I'm trying to do. What I want to do now is make this other line concentric. So I'm going to make this one, I need to make that concentric to that, and I may need to make the other side concentric to the other side. So what did that just do to me? Can I lengthen this thing? I can lengthen. No, I can't lengthen it there. Can I lengthen it there? I can lengthen it there. So that was weird. Okay, I'm going to highlight this thing, and I'm going to remove that constraint. So now I just have a line again. And I'm going to recheck the degrees of freedom on this circle and that line. That's still 0. I want to make that and that coincident. And I want to make that and that coincident. And I want to make that and that perpendicular. And I want to make those two lines equal. So this line and that line equal. Let's see how that does with my degrees of freedom now. I believe they should be 0. Yep. Okay. Now we got to deal with this line here. So this line is a couple things here. I need to make the center of that and that coincident. And I need to make the circle and the endpoint of that coincident. Now I think I should be able to rotate this thing around. I thought I could rotate that thing around. Let's see, check my degrees of freedom. It says it has 1 degree of freedom, which should be the rotation. So I'm going to stick an angle on that between this line and that line. And for now I'm just going to set an angle. And if I change that angle, let's say I set that to 0 or to 45. Come on. Oops. I edit. If I set that to 45, there we go. So yep, I can rotate that. Let's see what the degrees of freedom are. 0. Okay, so this thing here is now pretty well locked down. But they really want to make this either 0 or 90, right? So what I'm going to have to do is come into the variables. And I'm going to say this is going to be my plan north rotation. And it's going to be a angle. And it's not going to be visible. I'm going to make that hidden. And so there's either going to be 0 or 90. So I'm going to have two variations here. I'm either going to have portrait, or wait, I'm going to start with landscape. Landscape. And then I'm going to have another one called portrait. Okay, portrait's going to have that set to 90. Landscape's going to have that set to 0. And now let's see how this operates. So if I hit landscape and run it. Oh, there's my problem. I haven't used that variable yet, so I got to come in here and edit the dimension. Plan north rotation. See, now it's set to 0. Now it's set to 90. So you see how that rotates left or right depending on which one you're working with. So I'm going to put that back to north. Then there are two locations that those texts are placed off of. So I'm just going to draw a couple lines just so I know where them are starting from to make my life a little bit easier. And then I'm just going to take this text and move it out of the way. And then I'm going to come over here to annotate, match that text, and okay, I think I'm on the right stuff. So now I need to put in the word plan. Alright, let's start with north. Make my life a little bit easier here. Come on, caps lock, there we go, north. And what am I going to do? I'm going to use this enable the association. And I'm going to change this port. I'm going to change that plan north rotation angle to 45 while I work this thing. Why can I not snap to it again? North. There it is. And back to 0. Ah, crap. Let's try that again. So, north. Element not valid for that tool. I don't want that one. Tab. There, I want that one. Then I want there. Now it's associated, so if I change it to portrait, it didn't move with it. So it isn't snapping, or it isn't working the way it should. So I'm going to take that text and try this again. And place the text. North. Cap box. North. Hit tab. So some reason it's not letting me pick the line that I want it to pick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start fresh because this thing is just driving me nuts. So what I can come back here to my constraints. I'm just going to remove them all. Start fresh. Take these two out of here because they're driving me nuts for now. That's the one I really want. So I'm going to come back in Set that to fixed. Then I'm going to set my radius again. And we got that thing set. So that circle should be 0 degrees of freedom. Then I want to make these things coincident. So from the center of that circle, so tab that and that need to be concentric. Oh, you know what I should do? I could probably fix this bottom edge right there. So that's fixed now, and that's concentric. So if I take this thing, now it can be moved anywhere in the circle. So now if I put my text in and associate it, annotate, place text. Let's try this again. North. I'm going to pick the endpoint there. See how it let me pick it now? And now if I take this and rotate it, the north moves with it. Okay, that's the way I want that to operate. Now I'm going to repeat that with plan. Well, it isn't exactly how I want it to operate, but it's close. There's a couple more things I need to do after this, so now I'm going to repeat that with plan. And I'm going to pick the endpoint of that line and the endpoint of that line. Now that stuff should be in there fairly well. If I rotate this thing, they both move, and if I rotate it back, they both move. That's good. Now I need to come back and deal with these two lines. They don't seem to be exactly the same weight. I'm going to make sure these are both set to that, and I'm going to set that to 0. Make sure they're the same line weight, and then the color I want it to be, what color is that stuff right now? That thing is set to 253, so let's make sure they're both set to 253. Oops, that was 252, 253. Okay, now I can put these lines in. So let's look at my degrees of freedom on this thing. So back to constraints, degrees of freedom. I got 1 degree of freedom, and that's because that north arrow can move, or that plan north can move, and that's good because we want it to be that way. The next thing I want to do is come in and make this and that coincident, and I want to make this and that coincident, and then I want to make those a little bit longer so that I can okay, so then the next thing I want to do is set the distance on this thing. No, by element. There we go. And now I want to make it 5/8 of an inch long. So 5/8. See how that worked? Now it's coincident, it's in there, it's just not vertical yet. So what I need to do is come in here and let's see, can I rotate that thing? Oh, let's do 2 points. From there, Let's do 3 points. From there to there to there. Now I know that's horizontal, so I should be able to come back in and fix that angle. Then I want to make sure that this and that are perpendicular. And then I want to make sure that this and that are equal. And then I want to make sure that this circle and that point is coincident. And I want to make sure that this circle and that point is coincident. There we go. Now that line is locked in. So now if I come in here, look at the degrees of freedom, it should still be 1, right? Because that I can still rotate that north arrow. So if I come in here, I should still be able to take that thing and rotate it around. Now, here's where I put the angle on. From here to there, plan north rotation. Bang, done. Okay, so now this text isn't rotating with that line. So if I bring my variables back up, portrait, notice that text is not rotating like it should. So what I need to do is put a rotation angle on this text. So I'm going to come in here on plan and on north, and I'm going to find the rotation angle of Z, I believe, is going to be, oh, it won't let me do it 2 at a time. Let me try it once at a, I can pull this down, plan north rotation, and then this one I can set to plan north rotation. Now I think they'll both rotate together. Ah, there we go. So see how that rotates? Landscape, portrait, landscape, portrait. So that's working exactly the way it should. Now the other thing that could happen is I've been told that some people don't want to see the word plan up there. They just want to see the word north. So how would we turn that off? So what I'm going to do is put in here another variable, which is going to be just plain plan rotation. And plan rotation is going to be, again, an angle. And it's not going to be visible. I'm going to make it hidden so that way people don't have a chance to mess with it. And plan rotation is going to be 0. And what I need to do is look at this and set rotation X equal to plan rotation. And I don't need to rotate Y. And I'm going to set rotation X to be plan rotation. Nope, hold on. North never should disappear, so I'm going to set that back to none. Okay, and didn't I say that was supposed to be an angle? Yep, that's an angle. So if I come down here and set plan or landscape with plan rotation equal to 90, does it turn off? Yes. I set it back to 0, turns back on. Okay, so now that I've gotten that to work, what I can do is copy landscape and make it landscape plan off. And then I can make a copy of this one and make it portrait plan off. And all I'm doing in the plan offs is setting it equal to 90, or the plan rotation equal to 90. So now let's try this out. So if I go to landscape, That looks good. I go to portrait. That looks good. Go to portrait, plan off. That looks good. I'm going to always switch it back on before I rotate it back. I've noticed some goofy things happen with that text if you don't have it on when you do this 90-degree rotation. So then I can rotate it back to north, plan off, plan back on. Oh, see, there's that goofy thing happening. So I'm going to undo twice. I'm going to rotate it back to landscape before I go to landscape plan off. There we go. So always turn it back on before you rotate it. There we go. That seems to be fairly well working. And if I show my degrees of freedom, none. So I'm at 0. So we're good there. All of that stuff works. Then the next thing that I need to do is bring in that north arrow. So I'm going to fit my view. Come back to my cells. And in my cell library, there should be a north arrow here someplace. So next to 22, there's probably a 23. There we go. And that thing can be right in the center of this thing. Yeah. Here's what we're going to do. Drop it in there. Then we're going to drop this cell. Then, we're going to drop that too. Yeah. Okay. Now, what we want to do is set the weight of this a little bit heavier because it's really light. If we look at this thing, the weight of it is 7. That's heavy. That should be actually 5. And the weight of this thing and that thing should be 7. So that that north arrow really stands out. Then what we want to do is set the length of this line. So we're going to go back to our constraints and we're going to dimension that and make sure that that's 5/8, so 0.625. So that doesn't change. Then we want to make these lines concentric or coincident. So from the endpoint of that and the endpoint of that are coincident. The endpoint of that and the endpoint of that are coincident. And then the lengths of this and that are equal. And the length of this item is 6627. Yeah, that's kind of a weird distance. Why don't we just make that 625? There. That makes it real nice and round. Okay, then the other thing we need to do is make these two perpendicular. And we need to make the angle between this and that 45 degrees. And lock it in on that 45 degrees. What's the degrees of freedom on this thing now? There are 3. I think we can do some rotation on the thing. Let me see what happens when I try to manipulate this thing. It sure seems to be locked in with just rotation. Alright. So I want to make this circle and the endpoint of that line coincident, and this circle and the endpoint of that line coincident. There we go. Now, what can I do with this? I can rotate it, I believe. I can't seem to even rotate it. Why not? Maybe what I need to do now is set an angle from here to there. And I'm just going to set 60 for now. And then let's look at the degrees of freedom. None. Okay, so this is locked down pretty tight. But what I need is one more variable. And that will be the... Whoops, I didn't want a variation. Let's get rid of that one. Come up here to variables. I want another variable. And this is going to be the north angle. And that's in parentheses from plan north. So that's going to be based off of that angle from that item. And this thing's going to be an angle, and it's going to be visible so that it can be seen. And then the next thing I want to do is come in here and edit that dimension and make it north arrow. So now it's 0, and I can come in and change it to whatever I need it to be. 45, 95, 195, 225, 300. So it seems to be working pretty well now with 0 degrees of freedom. And if I change this thing to portrait mode, and then I set my north angle off of that, 45. Yep, seems to be working. 45, 90, 110. So alright. Now I'm going to switch myself back to landscape. Plop it back in there. So this thing now looks to be pretty well locked down. Let me double check my degrees of freedom. 0. Perfect. Alright, so everything seems to be working pretty well there. Let me fit it and save my settings. And there you go. There's how you make a parametric north arrow.